Hi guys, here's day 5 of our ELA. Today we're going to be just doing the reading of The Changing Landscape of California. So, first, I'll go over our vocab words. It's on 4.1 up here, and the page number in your activity book is 41. Okay, so I'll go over the vocab words. Then, we'll go into your reader. Okay, our readers, and that is on page 30. Okay, page 30. We'll read this one. Tomorrow, we'll read it again and then go over the questions. Okay? Well, for day 6, which this is day 5, so this should bring you till Friday. So this stuff should be all done by Friday if you have your workbooks and worksheets and whatnot. If not, start at day 1 or whichever day you ended up to get your worksheets done. Do not get all upset because I'm at day 5 and you guys just got your work next week, say. Whenever you get your work, start at day 1 for ELA, and then 1 day worth of work. Day 1, ELA, math, read aloud. Then the following day, day 2. The following day, day 3, and so on and so forth. Okay? If you miss a day for some strange reason, odd reason, whatever, then you guys just do it the next day. Okay? Don't think that you have to make up all these over the course of a week. I don't want you to get overwhelmed and get upset over it. So just get what you can get done each day. I'd like you to be able to get 1 math, 1 ELA, and 1 read aloud each day done once your book and hardcover copies, like the activity books and so on, once they come in, then you can start getting that work done. Okay? So, first, we'll go over the vocab words. You can go to your activity book, like I said, page 41. The first word is loincloth. And next to loincloth has the little N. And what is the little N? What does it stand for? It is a noun, right? And what is a noun? A person, place, thing, or animal. Okay, so this is a thing, and it's called, in the definition of, it's a piece of cloth worn around the hips as clothing by men in certain cultures, usually in warm climates. So we may or may not have seen loincloths, but kind of like the cloth kind of almost looks like a skirt for men. Okay, back in the day, a lot of the natives would have to wear it, but you weren't wearing it if you were in the cold weather, right? Because that's not going to help you very much. But in the warm weather, maybe in the desert area when it's hot and so on, or in some people would wear them in like tropical weather, right, where it's a little bit warmer there and doesn't get very cold. Okay. Second one, quiver. That is another N, which is a noun, which is a person, place, thing, or animal. And this one is a bag or a case used to carry arrows. So it's not just a regular bag, it's a bag that you would put your arrows into. Okay? Number 3, nimble. That's an ADJ. Does anyone remember what ADJ is? Give you a hint. It starts adjective. Yes, excellent. And do we remember what an adjective did? Describes our nouns, or a describing word. And a nimble means able to move quickly and gracefully. So if you're a nimble person, you would be someone who can move gracefully and quickly without being maybe seen or without being heard. Okay? And number 4, immunity. Some of us may have remembered that when we used to play Survivor, and that was when you guys would have your tokens of immunity, and then that made it so you couldn't get what in our classroom? Voted out, right? So you would use your immunity, means you couldn't get voted out. It's also an N, which is a noun, which is a person, place, thing, or animal, and it's the body's ability to resist or fight off a disease. So for us, we would use it for, in Survivor, you would fight off being voted off the island. But in this case, when you're immunity, when we see it, it's going to be people that are immune to a certain disease. Okay? So, now what I'd like you guys to do is go to your reader, which is page 30. Starts like this. The Changing Landscape of California. It says chapter 4, page, let's see, 30. Okay? At the eastern edge of California's Central Valley, where the grassland meets the jagged Sierra Nevada mountains, there is a city named Oroville. In Spanish, oro is the word for gold. This city was once a small town. The town earned its name during the California Gold Rush when thousands of gold prospectors flocked to the valley in search of quick riches. Oroville was just one of the many lawless, rowdy towns that sprang up all over Northern California during that time. If it's lawless, it means that there's no laws. And if it's rowdy, do you think it's a calm place to be? No. Most people who joined the gold rush never did find much gold. However, they did find other forms of wealth. Oroville was the head of the Feather River, just beneath the Sierra Nevada mountains. Supplies for the gold miners were shipped up that river from Sacramento. People who lived in Oroville did not need to look for gold because they grew rich selling shovels and food to the miners up the hills. So you may not have been able to find gold, but for some of the miners that were doing other things, you could sell your shovels, you could make shovels and sell them, so supplies for them to do the gold mining. When the gold rush ended, pioneers moved in and carved up the land into farms. Thanks to warm, sunny summers, wet winters, and rich soil, the Central Valley was perfect for farming. A few years later, the Transcontinental Railroad was finished, linking California to the rest of the United States. The railroad passed right through downtown Oroville, making it possible for Central Valley farmers to send their goods to markets all over the country. So how do you think the Native Americans were affected by the end of the gold rush? So a lot of the Native Americans, if they're making, if the gold miners are making railroads and making other means of transportation, taking over towns and villages, what's going to happen to the Native Americans' land? They might not have any. They may lose their lives and their houses. Next page, page 32. We're on this one now. Okay. It was in downtown Oroville in the summer of 1911, many years after the gold rush of the 1840s and 1850s, that a middle-aged man named Ishi, the last of his people, emerged from the wilderness. It was a hot, dry summer just like every summer in the valley. A few nights before, a thunderstorm had rolled through and a bolt of lightning had started a wildfire in the dry, grassy foothills across the river. Oroville was safe from the flames, but the winds blew smoke through the town for many days. Ishi must have looked like a ghost to anyone who saw him sneaking down the smoke-filled street. He wore only a tattered loincloth made of rabbit hide, and he carried a bow and a small quiver or bag full of arrows. Ishi was starving, alone, and scared. There was a time when settlers lived alongside Native Americans in California's Central Valley. Indeed, there was a time when Native Americans were the only people living in what is now California. But in 1911, Ishi was a very unusual sight. He was certainly not the last Native American in California, but he was probably the last one to leave the woods and the old way of living. He was certainly the last of his tribe, the Yahi people. So how do you know that the lives of the Native Americans in California were significantly different before 1911 and then after 1911? Well, by 1911 there were no other members of Ishi's tribe. So by 1911 everyone was gone, they're thinking. He was the last of it. Ishi was starving and alone, so we know that he was not being fed, he couldn't get food, and alone, which means he was all by himself. However, before 1911, his tribe existed. But because of all these people coming in to get gold and mine, they ended up doing what to his tribe? Either killing them or they starved to death, couldn't get any food or water or anything like that. Why do we still remember a lonely, hungry man named Ishi who was searching for food on that smoky, hot summer day? What had happened to the rest of his people and all the other native tribes of California? Unfortunately, The story of what happened to the Native American population of California presents a sad, dark chapter in American history. The Native Americans of California were pushed aside to make way for gold mines, railroads, farms, towns, and cities. If someone's being pushed aside, what do you think that means in that context with the Native Americans? What were happening to them all? They were all losing their homes, right? It is impossible to know the exact numbers, but the best estimates are that there are around 300,000 Native Americans in California when the first Spanish settlers arrived. There were well over 100 different tribes and a wide variety of cultures, languages, and customs. Mostly they lived in small villages ranging from 100 to 1,000 people. There were no formal borders or property lines, but each tribe was adapted to life in a specific area. So how many Native Americans before the settlers started coming into California, that area? 300,000. Okay? And how did most of them survive or live before the Spanish settlers arrived? They lived in those small villages, but they had 100 to all the way up to 1,000 different people in each of their tribes. All the California tribes lived a hunter-gatherer lifestyle. Hunter-gatherer, let's see what it means. Acorns were a major source of food throughout the region. Acorns are nuts from the oak tree. You would not want to eat an acorn raw because the taste is very bitter, but if you grind it up into flour and soak it, you can remove most of the bitterness and use it to make tasty bread. Fish were another major food source for many tribes. The tribes caught fish from the ocean, the rivers, and the lakes. Besides the acorns and fish, each region had various animals and plants for people to hunt and gather, such as rabbit and deer, plus various roots, berries, and other gifts from nature. So how did most of them get their food back then, the natives? Hunting, which would be where they would shoot the animal, and gathering, which means that they would, like kind of like a squirrel, they gather all their nuts and acorns and whatnot. So these people would have to gather their berries, their roots, their nuts, anything they could, and bring them back to eat. Next page, we're on page 34. Should have these guys in a giant canoe. Trade was also an important part of tribal life in California. If they could not find what they needed in nature, the people could trade with a neighboring tribe. Coastal tribes had access to lots of fish, but they needed more acorns. Inland tribes had plenty of acorns, but not always enough meat. Tribes in the central mountains had access to a special rock called obsidian, or the volcanic glass. We read about that once when we were talking about lava and what it could do once it dried. It'd make that obsidian, right? That black, shiny rock, which was valuable for making razor-sharp arrowheads and knives. Obsidian was far more valuable to Native Americans than gold or silver. They did not find much use for those metals, though they did know where to find them. So the Native Americans, if they wanted gold and silver, they could find it. However, as we've read, our Native Americans do not get things that are useless to them. What was gold and silver going to do for them as far as survival? They didn't need money at this point. So they were not really worried about the metals. They liked the rock, which would give them ways to hunt, because then they could make arrowheads with it, or knives, and that would help them in survival. Canoes played an essential role in the culture and lifestyle of nearly every California tribe. Different regions made different kinds of canoes. In Southern California, they built big tomols out of wooden planks. Only specially trained craftsmen could build them, and they never shared their secrets. Tomols could carry several paddlers and hundreds of pounds of trade goods. Best of all, the sturdy, speedy tomols were seaworthy, so southern tribes could paddle up the coast and trade with the northern tribes. So, why was trade so important to the Native Americans in the state that is now called California? Well, certain things were a lot more valuable for them, right? So they needed to trade with those ones to get those other items that may not have been available for them. Along with that tomol, or that canoe that they built, even by the picture that you're looking at, What was the difference between Tamoles and just your normal canoe that you may see on a boat, on a lake? It's much bigger, right? It can fit lots of weight, for like pounds of trading materials. So if they went to trade, they could bring a lot of stuff with them. And they were quick, so you could paddle them quicker. Along with, you could fit a lot more people on them, right? Next page, page 35. In the Central Valley, the people made their canoes by weaving long, tough reeds or river grass. They did not need to paddle into the rough ocean. Instead, they had wide, lazy rivers and sparkling lakes. And all the way up north, where the great redwood trees grew up in the clouds, people made dugout canoes from hollowed out logs. Dugout canoes were tough enough for the ocean, but also nimble enough, or quick and so on, to survive the wild mountain rivers. Daily life focused on securing enough food for everyone. Fortunately, California was a land of plenty, so if everyone worked hard, there was usually enough food to go around. In the good years, there was more than enough food so the people had time for other things. Basket weaving was common throughout California. Tribes of the Central Valley were highly skilled, producing a variety of colorful baskets in all shapes and sizes. So the years that they would get a lot of food, they could do what other things with their spare time besides trying to find food and trade? Make baskets, right? There was also time for fun and games. In Northern California, children enjoyed a game similar to soccer. The boys and girls all played together. Boys were only allowed to kick the ball, whereas the girls could kick it, throw it, or carry it to the goal. However, a boy was also allowed to pick up a girl and carry her into the goal with the ball. So let's discuss that kind of game. So, when you would play that game, the boys could kick it. Could they pick up the actual ball? No. However, the girls could kick it. They could pick up the ball. They could carry the ball. They could run to the goal with the ball. But what was the advantage that the boys had outside of just kicking? What could they do with the girls? They could pick them right up as they're carrying the ball and run the girls to the goal. Page 36. This picture right here. Okay? As with all Native Americans, the people of California built their houses using the best materials available in their home territory. Southern tribes used the small trees and the reeds to build tools. A tool was a round one-room hut. Despite being made from reeds, tools were strong, able to withstand wind and rain, and cozy enough for the mild Southern California winters. So if it's a mild winter, are they like our types of winter? No, they're pretty easy to get through compared to what ours is. The Midwork people and other tribes of Central and Northern California preferred the umaka, which was shaped like a teepee but made of long wooden rails instead of buffalo hide. Farther north in the redwood forests, the Wyatt people and their northern neighbors built stout, sturdy houses out of redwood planks. Okay, so we have two different kinds of natives in this one. One type of native was the Miwok. Those are the people, and the other tribes of California preferred the Umaka. Okay, and the Umaka was shaped like a teepee, but had long wooden rails instead of the buffalo hide. Then we also learned about the Wiyat, or the Wyatt people, and their northern neighbors built the sturdy houses made out of redwood. Redwood were those giant trees we talked about, so they would make them out of that type of wood for their houses. Round houses were the central feature in most villages. No matter what type of houses they built, and no matter whether the tribe was large or small, wealthy or poor, there was almost always a round house in the middle of the village. The round house was used for ceremonies and important meetings. The round house was also where the tribal religious leaders or shamans carried out their important rituals. Religious beliefs reflected a close connection to the cycles of nature and to animals. While all tribes had their unique beliefs, myths, and rituals, the people generally believed they shared a special kinship or bond with other living things. They felt fortunate and thankful to live in a place with so many resources. So, the area that they're living in, do they have a lot more resources than like the people from the Great Plains? Yeah. They could live in an area and didn't have to travel all around like the Great Plains who had to travel to hunt and keep up with the what? Buffalo. These guys had a lot of berries and other ways they could get food. Here's another picture. This is the picture of him. Okay? It says the tools could withstand wind and rain. So that's what they're saying. It's kind of shaped like a teepee, but it's got some wood instead of just buffalo hide. Page 38. The Wiyot tribe of the north, with their dugout canoes and stout wooden homes, held the World Renewal Ceremony each autumn. This special dance marked the beginning of a new year. The World Renewal Ceremony was hosted by the wealthiest village. Everyone was invited, and nobody was ever turned away. The dance could go on for 7 days or more. Although there were feasting and great fun, the ceremony did have a serious purpose. The people showed their respect for nature and prayed for a good year ahead. California was a land of plenty, but there was always challenges and dangers. The Wiyot hoped their ceremony would help prevent natural disasters such as the earthquakes, floods, or failure of the acorn crop. Okay? So, renewal is like when we're going to reuse something. Okay? So what they want to do is renew something, make sure that it would come back to them, keep it. So they would renew, they wanted the plants to come back, the acorns, okay? They also would want the animals to come back, so they were back in their area so they could hunt and gather their foods. Along with, they did not want what to renew? Any type of diseases, because if that renewed and they came back, then what would happen? A lot of deaths. So even though they had fun during these renewal ceremonies, they still were serious. And the serious part was when they were praying and asking for renewal of their crops that they had used that past year. Page 40. Spanish settlers colonized California beginning in the mid-1700s, and things changed quickly for Native Americans. Instead of trying to push the California tribes out of the way, the Spanish sent missionaries to persuade the people to change their way of life. Missionaries were determined to convert the Native American people to Christianity, to educate and, in their minds, civilize them, and to teach them to become farmers. A typical mission included a church and new houses for Native Americans, plus thousands of acres of farmland. However, while the missionaries did offer peace, they had brought soldiers with them too. They gave the tribes a choice: live at the mission or fight these soldiers. Once they moved to the missions, Native Americans had to dress like Europeans. They had to stop practicing their own beliefs and customs. Mostly, however, they worked the farmland, essentially a kind of forced labor. So what was the goal of the Spanish settlers with respect to Native Americans? What did they want them to do? Change the way that they were living and do what? Be the way that the Spanish were. Along with, if it's forced work and they're not paying them of any sorts, what would it kind of resemble? Like slavery, right? Not surprisingly, many tribes did not want to give up their homelands. At first, the Spanish could not force many people to move. However, without even realizing it, European explorers and settlers brought a deadly weapon to the Americas: disease. Smallpox and other illnesses devastated Native American populations in Southern California. These people had no immunity to these diseases. That means their body wasn't ready for them, so their body couldn't fight it off, which meant your body can't fight off that disease. What happens to you? You end up dying, right? The people had no immunity to these diseases. Within a few years, some tribes were almost totally wiped out. The survivors had little choice but to live at the missions. So if they didn't live, they would either have to fight those soldiers, or all this disease is going to hit you anyway, and what would the disease ultimately end up doing to the natives? Killing them anyway. Eventually, the Native American groups of Northern California suffered a similar fate. First came the explorers, followed by the miners and the settlers. These new arrivals were all hungry for the land and its resources. They came by the thousands to mine and to build farms and railroads and cities. They had guns, plus help from the U.S. Army, and they were determined to own every inch of all the valuable land in California. Tribes were forced to move onto small reservation lands. Those who refused were often massacred. They didn't get off their land. So, these U.S. Army and settlers who were trying to get gold would come to California. That's a great piece of land. I want it. The natives said, no, you're not getting it. They would just go and kill them or massacre them, unless they moved to these small areas that were called reservations. They were reserved for just these Native Americans. But do you think the reservations had great land? Probably not, because all the European settlers, miners, so on and so forth, those people were getting the best land. The natives were just stuck on this own little reservation. Remember Ishi, the wild man who emerged from the wilderness in Orville? When he was just a boy, his people, the Yahi, refused to move off their land. Gold miners attacked Ishi's village and killed most of his family and friends. He and a handful of others managed to survive in the wild. Now we're on page 41. Years passed, and one by one all the other Yahi died. At last, only Ishi remained in the woods and canyons where his ancestors once lived. Hungry and tired, with no place left to go, Ishi finally came in from the wilderness. Ishi did find a place in modern society. He devoted much of the rest of his life to teaching anthropologists about the Yahi language, mythology, and customs. The Yahi tribe is gone now, but in some ways the culture lives on, and Ishi's knowledge remains for everyone to learn. So how did Ishi help? He taught them everything that they were doing. They're natives, Native Americans. He taught them everything. Right? So he would teach all these people, anthropologists who are studying things that happened in the old days, he would teach them what they used to do, how it affected them, where did they live, and so on. It is also important to note that today there are still over 100 tribes in California. They do not all live according to the old traditions and lifestyles, but there has been a major revival, or there's a jump in the amount of Native Americans, cultures, and tribal life over the past several decades. In fact, there are twice as many Native Americans in California today as there were when the first Spanish explorers arrived. Some live on the reservations, and some still practice the ancient arts and customs. In the north, the Wihas still hold those world renewal ceremonies each year. Despite terrible hardships endured by their ancestors, these proud people continue to ensure that their culture survives. So even though their ancestors were killed or massacred or forced to live on these, they are still practicing those cultures of the world renewal ceremonies and other traditions that they may have used and exhibited during their when their family were younger. Right? All right, guys. So I'm not going to have us do the questions today. Tomorrow I'll read again, and then we're going to do questions in our activity book. Okay, so I'll get you the activity book. This is what we're going to do tomorrow. Or because this is day 5, this may be Friday for you. So whatever day it is, the next day. If it's a weekend, we don't do our work on weekends, right? Saturday and Sunday is your off day, just like if you're in school. So tomorrow we're going to read, and then we're going to do our questions, which is on page 43 in our activity book. Remember, I'll make these small, and it's 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, 4 pages, but we'll make them small. This one's a chart. We can go through those pretty quick. So maybe tomorrow we'll do this and the chart, depending on how long it takes us, and then we'll do the other stuff the following day. Okay? But if we can get through it kind of fast, then we'll get the whole thing done tomorrow or Monday. All right? You guys have a great day. Bye.